people came here to party, and you're at a lecture. Yeah! What do you do? What do you do when you're getting serious? We're going to a funeral and we just hang out. Okay, you're obviously here because the idea of how to drop Freud into a conversation at an art opening is something that obviously appeals to you. And you know, there's a few interesting. I love art openings myself. It's generally free alcohol, though not always. You should buy a donation. It's generally free alcohol. Sometimes there's food. It gets less and less these days, and also, you know, it's very social, etc. But there's a few awkward things about art openings. You know that thing that people do at art openings when they're having a conversation with each other. They don't quite know how to end it. They sort of drift up from each other. That's one of those awkward moments. Another awkward moment is when you're talking to somebody and they're looking over your shoulder because they saw something. That's another one. And the third one is when someone drops a reference to some theorist, usually Freud, and you think, ha ha ha, and you laugh along because, you know, it's so funny, and then you go off and you Google it as soon as you get home. You go, oh, Castration Complex, that's what I had when I was at the opening, and somebody actually made me look like an idiot. So, this is an easy three-step process to how to drop Freud into a conversation at an opening. Now, the first part of it is the lingo. You've got to learn the lingo. You've got to know exactly what you're talking about here. And, you know, I approximate that. That's good enough for me. So, you've got to learn the lingo. The second step is you've got to try it out. We'll try it out in a couple of artworks, okay? Let's do this later. And then the third part is you've got to apply the theory to the practice. Okay, so let's start off with a bit of Freud. Now, Freud, this is the guy himself, Sigmund Freud. Everyone loves Freud. He looks very serious. He's, you know, he has a beard, which means he is very serious. And one of the interesting things about Freud, one of the revolutionary things that Freud did when he came up with his theories in the late 19th and early 20th century is he revolutionized how we see the self. Before that, Freud was a neurologist, so he was a neuroscience scientist. He believed that, you know, when he went into his profession, that all mental illnesses, neuroses and psychoses are based within our physical being. But then when he thought about it a bit more, he thought, hang on, there's something deeper happening here. That maybe it can't just be explained with straightforward physiology. Maybe there's something else. So he started thinking about the psyche, and he divides the psyche into these three things: the ego, the superego, and the id. Now, the ego is the bit that is often portrayed in diagrams as being the bit of the iceberg above the water. It's the bit everyone sees. So the ego is kind of the bullshit part of us. The ego is the public face we put on when, you know, we actually really want to do other things, and I'll get to that in the id, but we can't. So the ego is a sort of bullshit part, but the superego is in fact how we internalize societies, laws, conventions in a way that you know, controls this other bit here, the id. The id. I could have done with an echo effect. Oh, everyone's gonna, it's a baby! You heartless people! This is actually used as a Benetton ad back in 1992. They sold sweaters showing this. You can almost smell it, can't you? It's a scratch and sniff version of it. Freud says, before we develop the ego, before ego formation, before the superego comes along and imposes itself, you know, the conventions and the laws of society, we are just id. That's all we are. When we're born, in fact, we are completely id. Now, the id is made up of all of the drives. You know, largely for Freud, the sexual drive. He does talk a bit about the thanatos, which is the death drive. He sort of leaves that, you know, a bit later in his work. Anyway, he says when we're born, from the very moment we're born, firstly we're sexual, but we're not actually sexual in the sense that we think about it, you know, as we get older. You know, you're not bisexual, you're not straight, you're not, you know, you're not gay, you're not into sheep, even if you're Welsh. You're just, you know, I'm Welsh. Polymorphously perverse. Polymorphously perverse. So you have this unformed sexuality. Now, we're only driven at this point by what he calls the pleasure principle, which is this idea that everything we do is about pleasure. So if we want to eat, we squawk, don't we? You get a breast shoved in your mouth if you're lucky, it's a bottle otherwise. And at that point, you know, we get sustenance, we get food, and we're satisfied. You know, we don't have to worry about meal times, we get fed all the time. If we want to poo, what do we do when we want to poo? We just kind of go for it, don't we? You've had kids, I don't have kids. But if you've had kids, they just go where they want to go before any of this other stuff kicks in. Now, also, the primary love object, you know, because you're polymorphously diverse, you're not really into anything in particular at the moment, or you're into everything in particular, the primary love object is your mother. So this is where we get the idea of the Oedipal, which comes from the Sophocles play from, you know, the 5th century BC, Oedipus Rex. And, you know, he talks about how, you know, all of us have this kind of Oedipal relationship. The mother is the primary love object. I'll get back to that in a bit. Now, the other part is we have no organized erotogenic zones. Now, most of us, if we think about sexuality, we tend to sort of think about it being a genital thing. It's kind of concentrated on, you know, a sort of in, you know, bits down here. What he says, there's no erotogenic zones, that we start off with the mouth being a very erotogenic zone, but really at this point there's nothing. It's all just, you know, kind of about getting pleasure from everything. So we go through this process of ego formation. Now, in this process of ego formation, we go through what he calls, now you may look at me like I'm making this stuff up. Well, he was. The oral, the anal, and the genital stage. Now we go through these different sort of stages, and we ultimately, this is what makes us subjects, forms our ego. So there are 3 different stages of ego formation that he talks about. Now the first one, bear in mind, you know, remember the lingo here, okay? You may be tested on this later. The oral. Now the oral, when we're at the oral stage, we're actually at that process where we realize that... Oh yeah, people sitting in the front row, sorry, this is Prezi. And some people have complained about vertigo. Anyway, yeah, so when you're at the oral stage, you are, you know, you get pleasure from, you know, your mother's breast. You go, oh yeah, I can get that at any particular time. Now, as we go through this process of ego formation, it's all about curtailing satisfaction. So it's all about deferring gratification. You know that expression, deferred gratification. So it's all about putting things off. So the oral stage, we actually realize that we can't just eat whenever we want to. That sooner or later the mother's breast is going to go away. I just thought of that little Britain episode with the bitty thing. But anyway, sooner or later the breast is going to go away, and we're going to have to wait for certain meal times until we eat. But sometimes some people get fixated at the oral stage, and those people who are fixated at the oral stage are people who smoke heavily, who talk too much, so they're academics basically. They're people who like the sound of their own voice. Those are orally fixated people. Anyway, so sometimes some people get stuck at that particular point. Now the next one, I hope you appreciate also these very, very sexual images that I'm showing you here. Very, very inspirational. Oh. Actually, that does look a little bit like Dark Data. Anyway, when we get to the anal stage, so the erotogenic zone then is is your bum, essentially. I've been trying to think all day about how I'm going to say this. Does bum sound too juvenile? Your anus, your arse, your ass if you may. Now, the anus becomes the second sort of primary erotogenic zone, and when we go through the anal phase, it's actually part of potty training. So we get to this point where we realize, we're told, you can't shit wherever you want to shit. You actually have to shit in this sort of weird blue plastic receptacle that looks nothing like the other thing that you're going to use for the rest of your life, but you need to shit into this thing. I'm here at the MCA talking about shit. My mother's so proud of me. Anyway, so that's the anal stage. Now, some of us get fixated. We get fixated keeping our shit in. Those people are, come on, yes, those people are the anally retentive. If you've ever lived in a share house, you know that there is always someone who is the messy bastard, and there's always someone who is the anal one. Absolutely, yeah? It's always the case. So if you've ever lived in a share house, it is 100% always the case. Now, the anally expulsive, the other ones, like me, are the ones who like shitting everywhere. We just like let it go. Open the floodgates and let it go. We love that. We love the sensation of letting it go. We love our mess. We love everything that's meant to be on the inside to be spread out everywhere. Now, interestingly enough, Freud actually says that anally retentive people, and those people that you giggle because they know somebody's like this, are also literally tight asses. They are tight asses. The idea of the miser, he actually writes about the idea of the miser, that the miser is, you know, the tight ass, the person who, you know, wants to keep everything to the hoarder. So that's anal retention. So anyway, at this stage, when we get to this anal stage, we sort of think, okay, I can't just shit where I want to shit, unfortunately. I have to, you know, whether I retain it or I let it out, I've got to actually let it eventually in some other place where people aren't going to point and stare. We end up then with the primary erotogenic zone being the genital, and this, according to Freud, is all about the, you know, continuation of the species. You know, if my ugly bits don't sort of collide with your ugly bits, then we're not going to have like little kind of squarky things that are going to go through this, and you know, the continuation of the species, because there's only 7 billion of us, is not going to happen. So we go through this genital stage, and the genital stage we decide, you know, it's time to you know, it's time to normalize our sexuality. And, you know, when we get fixated there, according to Freud, that's kind of normal development. He does have a couple of other sides to this. Now, one of them is this idea of the castration complex. Now, you're familiar with the castration complex. Now, he says, this only happens to boys. He says that there's one particular stage that we, as boys, suddenly see our mother naked for the first time. And we go, oh my God, she's got no cock. Absolute shock at this lack of cock. So, you know, we get a castration complex. Now, this can itself actually work itself out as a fetish. So, Freud says that, you know, if you see, you see your mother, you go, oh, no cock, and then you suddenly look at feet, you become a foot fetishist. You look at a mouth, you become a foot fetishist. When I was running through this earlier today, I thought, when did I actually see my mother naked? And she was sitting on a toilet. So maybe I got a toilet, but I certainly got a fetish for toilet humour. Maybe that's where that comes from. Now, Freud, being a, you know, an old sexist, says women don't go through this process. He says, in fact, women go through a thing that we call penis envy. So you girls, you're kind of, you know, you're a particular kind of age in your formative years, and you suddenly see your dad. Now, I don't know what 70s freaky household Freud used to live in where parents walk around in the nude, but you're meant to see, at some point, your father's walking around and you go, oh my God, what is that? I want one of those. And you spend the rest of your life in pursuit of one of them. Apparently. Penis envy. Okay. Now, so this is this, you know, this ego formation thing. At the very end of this, you know, we end up kind of normal, happy kind of people, although we don't do it. We don't. Because underneath it all is the id. Is the id going, you know, oh, I want to f*** everything, I want to eat everything, I want to shit all over the place. That's where we repress. Only fixated come from the This is the limit, the threshold. You know, when people talk about subliminal, like subliminal advertising, that means below the limit, below the conscious limit, below the conscious threshold. So what we do when we have all these urges, we push them down. We force them down below the threshold. We repress, 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 repress. And being British, I know all about repression. Now, the thing that we use to repress is this thing called the superego. The superego is that part of us which, like I said, is the internalizing of the codes that we've learned through ego formation. It's all cultural stuff, isn't it? Now, the interesting thing for Freud is that he's fascinated and I'll get onto this shortly, he's fascinated with art because he sees, if you think about it, the id is always there from the very beginning, and it works, he argues, in images. We don't learn words for a while, do we? It's you know, a year or so before we learn any words. There are other theorists like Lacan who comes along with various theories about why that happens. But, so the unconscious is very susceptible to images much more than it is to words, because that is the language of the id, that's the language of the unconscious. So, the process of sublimation, when we force all these things down, what it actually does is then, they don't just sit there happily, do they? They don't just go, you know, yeah, I'm really happy not, you know, having sex with, you know, anything I like, with the turtle or, you know, whatever, you know, yanks your chain. No, these things bubble away. It's kind of like a pressure cooker, and I know that's a very 70s reference, but I know there's some people in the room which will get it. A pressure cooker, and a pressure cooker kind of shudders and quivers and shakes because, you know, it's full of pressure that wants to burst out, but it doesn't. Now, it actually does. In terms of the human psyche, what Freud says, we actually have what he calls parapraxis, which is a fantastic word. And when you go back out there into the gallery tonight, I want you to see if you can use parapraxis. Brilliant word, which is this. Parapraxis is the Freudian slip. You must have heard of the idea of the Freudian slip. Yeah. It's like, you know that scene in Austin Powers when the guy with the mole, yeah? I appeal to a slightly older generation here, you know, in Fawlty Towers with the Germans. Yeah. I'm not now going to make another reference to a silent movie. Now, he actually, what he does, he actually looks in his work. Freud actually looks at art, and one of the things they looks at is this statue of Moses by Michelangelo from 1512 to 1516, and he, you know, he psychoanalyzes it essentially. This is actually like this cartoon drawing from one of his books. And he says that Moses comes down from the mountain, he's got, you know, his tablets under his arm, and, you know, he's kind of, you know, he's very chuffed, he's sort of just been talking to God, he's, you know, the leader of the Israelites, he's pretty kind of, you know, confident in himself. And then suddenly, what the fuck, these people are worshipping a golden calf. And in that moment, he almost drops the 10 Commandments. See, he catches them under his arm. In fact, it's interesting how Michelangelo actually makes it just look like it's a manila folder. He catches it under his arm and grabs his beard. So what we see here, Freud argues, is this internalized energy from the id, that our physical response to that stressful situation is actually visible in this. Now, you could actually say, okay, it took him 4 years to etch this out of marble, you know, how much of a, you know, an instantaneous response can this be? But, you know, this is the way they analysed it. The other thing is condensation. Do people know who this? Yes, Michael Jackson and Mr. Bean. This is brilliant. If you go to this mall thing, has anyone been to this website? Fantastic. Yeah, go to that, put a picture of yourself in, put a picture of, you know, anything. Goose, it will make you and the goose look like you've had offspring. Now, this idea of condensation comes through in dream analysis, and Freud talks a lot about dream analysis. And he says that when we dream, we actually everyone has sort of done this, I think. When you have a dream, you dream of a place, but it's not really the same place. You know, it's kind of weirdly familiar but strange. The unheimlich, which he calls it too, which means unhomely. I always think of the unheimlich maneuver when you get something stuck in your throat. Anyway, he talks about this idea that in dream we condense two things together. You know, when you have a dream, you have you know a person, and it's that person, and it's a few other people, one or two other people as well. That's condensation. That's another way in which we manifest these parapraxes, you know, in our dream. And that's why the surrealists were really interested. When André Breton wrote the Surrealist Manifesto in 1923, which is when these ideas were really well established, that's why he was really interested in the idea of the dream. Which, you know, if you look at Dali's work are essentially photorealistic dreamscapes. Now, displacement. Everyone knows displacement because, thankfully, that advert about speeding that was on TV a few years ago. You know that one? Yeah. What does a man do when he reaches, 50-something and has a midlife crisis. He shags his secretary and he buys a, sports car and takes Viagra. The two things are connected because that is displacement. The sports car, you must have a little penis. The sports car. This is the idea of displacement. Now, some people say, I'll put this up here in respect of Neil Armstrong, who was one of my heroes growing up as a child. First man to step on the moon, died at 82 just this week. And some people say that the space race was this, because it was all about power, wasn't it? It was actually embroiled in the geopolitics of capitalism versus communism that was happening at a particular time in the 1960s. It was kicked off by, the space race was essentially kicked off by Kennedy. Now, some people say that, well, look at what was happening where the human race was spending its money at that particular time. It was spent on missiles, it was spent on these big sort of phallic objects. This is a fantastic score of an image that I found. Now, I think that's really childish. I think there was nothing about the space race that was remotely a displacement of phallic power. Okay, let's look at some art. So we're up to stage 2 here. We're kind of looking at a bit of art now. So this is Michelangelo's Last Judgment. Does anyone know where this painting is actually? I was going to say kept, but it's on a wall. It's a fresco. Anyone? I heard it. Yes, Sistine Chapel. It's in the Sistine Chapel. This is kind of like this is second on the bill in the Sistine, because everyone goes in and oh, creation of man. And this is actually at the end, that is the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, you can see that. This is actually at the end of the room. So this is, as significant as the rest of the Sistine Chapel that we know. So anyway, let's look at this, because let's face it, Michelangelo's dead and he can't sue. Someone give me a Freudian analysis of this. Come on, be brave.
I'm looking at anus.
Hey! I would say anally fixated. What about this?
Early.
I thought that, but then I thought, no, it's just a bunch of horny guys. What's going on here? What is that? What is this? It's like a massive, it's like God's false eyelashes. Now, someone with a more childish sense of humour than me might point out that this guy actually looks like he's wearing boxer shorts. In 1541 he's wearing boxer shorts. So I think a Freudian analysis of this would say that he's a premature ejaculation. Because he's covered his undies. He laughed. Is that him? No. What about this? What's going on here? I don't think it's, well, I think it's a bit of Castration Complex, I think. And of course, come on. Something else weird is happening here. Does anyone see this? I looked at this and it spooked me out because I thought, hey, maybe Michelangelo had like a time machine. And then I thought, no, maybe George Lucas just went to the Sistine Chapel. Anyway, let's take this one. Angelo Bronzino, around about the same time, circa, which is what that scene means, circa is 1545. So Bronzino paints this image, which is an incredibly Oedipal image. Why? Because we know that this is Venus, because as Aphrodite, she actually has the golden apple that she was awarded for being the most beautiful with the Judgment of Paris. And also she, up here, has this incredibly phallic sort of arrow. It's, the way she's kind of caressing it a bit there, it's a little bit kind of dodgy, I think. Why is it dodgy? Because that here is Cupid, who's her son. How do we know it's his son? Because he has a quiver, which again sounds kind of rude. I've also noticed just recently that there's a bit of tongue going in there. This is actually, quiver is the thing that you carry arrows in. So Venus has got this, and it actually comes out down here. And the thing that freaks me out is, who is that? I've read some art historians who say that that is the allegory, the syphilis for syphilis. So, 16th century, yeah, we've got allegories for, you know, kind of freedom and beauty, and let's have syphilis. So I think, you know, could you imagine the one today made the anal warts? Now this down here, this character here, that's folly, which is foolishness. Doesn't look particularly foolish. This one, I don't know who that is. I've decided to call him Ranga, the god of the redheads. This here, does anyone know who this is? See what's up there? Yes, this is Times, Father Time. That's denoted by a lack of hair and a bit of beard here, and you know. And what? But you know, he's not interested, is he? He's look, nah, doesn't care what. He's looking at something that's way off to the side. All right. So you might think it's a bit disrespectful taking a piss out of, you know, Paul Bronzino and Michelangelo. You know, 450, 480 years later, but it wasn't as bad as I think is what Monty Python did. Okay, so now let's put it into practice. Let's do a bit of practice here. Now, where's my drink? Thank you. So here we are at an opening in a gallery which is not a million miles away from here, and you know we've decided to go to this opening. And I hear you went to Castle this year.
Oh, amazing!
Yes, it was just I made lots of sand castles there myself. Yeah. Oh yes. Well, obviously this painting by Mohammed from 2008 is called Carl Sandilands. And you know, you can see he's taken the shock drop. Carl Sandilands, you might have known his low culture. He's taken the face of Carl Sandilands and, may I say, put him forward as being maybe Oedipus the king or maybe King Laius. And you know, we can obviously see that there's some phallic empowerment happening within this image by this mace that he has in his hand here that is rather penis-like, don't you think?
Superego.
Now, this is definitely about the Oedipus complex.
Why do you say that?
Because this mother is completely fucked. What about this one? Penis only. Okay, thank you very much everyone. This is a restaurant, alright? And that is that. Thank you very much.